He mailed his confessions to the police and signed them with a smiley face. For 30 years, a man in Wichita murdered families, vanished, and laughed at detectives through the mail. And the floppy disk that finally exposed him, it was hiding the most ordinary secret imaginable. Wichita, Kansas, January 15th, 1974. It is just after 8 in the morning and the temperature outside is hovering near freezing. Charlie Otero, 15 years old, walks home from school for lunch with two of his siblings. They push open the door of their modest house on North Edgemore Street and call out for their parents. Nobody answers. Charlie walks further inside, and in the next 60 seconds, his life ends, even though his body keeps moving. His father, Joseph Otero, is on the floor of the master bedroom. His mother, Julie, is on the bed. His 9-year-old brother, Joey, is in another bedroom. And his 11-year-old sister, Josephine, is hanging from a sewer pipe in the basement. All four have been bound with Venetian blind cord. All four have been strangled. The killer has taken nothing of value. He has taken only their lives and a wristwatch and a small radio. He has also taken his time. Investigators would later determine he had likely cut the phone line, waited inside the house, and ambushed the family as they arrived home that morning. This is the first known crime of the man who would eventually call himself BTK. 3 letters: bind, torture, kill. A name he gave himself in a letter to taunt the city of Wichita. And for the next 3 decades, he would become one of the most psychologically unsettling killers in American history. Not because of the number of victims, though there would be 10. Not because of the brutality, though it was extreme. But because of what he did between the murders. He wrote, he mailed, he called. He played a game with the police, with reporters, with the public, and for 31 years he won. This is the story of how a Cub Scout leader, a church council president, and a city compliance officer named Dennis Rader spent half his life murdering his neighbors and the other half mocking the people trying to catch him. And it is the story of how a single floppy disk, recovered in 2005, finally ended a manhunt that had defined an entire generation of Kansas law enforcement. To understand BTK, you have to understand the silence that came after the Oteros. For nearly 9 months, Wichita police had no suspect, no motive, and almost no physical evidence. Then, in April 1974, 21-year-old Catherine Bright was stabbed to death in her own home. Her brother Kevin was shot twice in the head and somehow survived, escaping to alert police. Kevin described a stocky white man with dark, wavy hair, but the case was treated as a separate incident. No one yet connected the dots. The connection would come from the killer himself. In October 1974, a man called the Wichita Eagle newspaper and directed a reporter to a specific book in the Wichita Public Library. Tucked inside that book was a letter. The letter described in chilling and accurate detail the murders of the Otero family. Details only the killer could know. The position of the bodies, the cord used, the plastic bag placed over Joseph Otero's head. The letter was rambling, written in broken English meant to disguise its author, and it included this line, quote, "The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them, BTK." End quote. He had named himself. He had branded his own murders, and he had served notice that he intended to continue. Detectives at the time were stunned. This was not the behavior of a typical killer. He wanted credit. He wanted attention. He wanted to be feared in print. For the next 3 years, BTK kept killing, and he kept writing. In March 1977, he strangled 24-year-old Shirley V.N. Relford in her home after locking her 3 terrified children in a bathroom. The children would later describe a polite, soft-spoken man who told them he had a problem with sexual fantasies. He even apologized before he killed their mother. In December of that same year, 25-year-old Nancy Fox became his 7th victim. After murdering her, he did something extraordinary. He walked to a payphone, called 911, and calmly told the dispatcher where to find her body. That recording still exists. The voice is flat, slow, almost bored. It is the voice of a man who believes he is untouchable. Then in 1978, he escalated again. He sent a poem to the Wichita Eagle titled "Oh Death to Nancy," mocking his own victim. He sent another letter to Cake Television, demanding media attention and complaining that he was not getting enough press. Quote, "How many do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper or some national attention?" End quote. He suggested possible nicknames for himself. The BTK Strangler, the Wichita Strangler, the Poetic Strangler. He wanted a brand. He wanted, in his own words, recognition. And then, almost as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished. For years, the letters stopped. The killings, as far as anyone could tell, stopped. Wichita exhaled. Detectives retired. The case grew cold. Children who had grown up afraid to walk home alone became adults, married, had their own children, and BTK became a ghost story. A name parents whispered. A folder gathering dust in the Homicide Bureau. Many in Wichita began to hope quietly that he was dead, that he was in prison for something else, that whatever drove him had simply burned out. What almost nobody knew was that BTK had never stopped. Between 1985 and 1991, he murdered 3 more women. Maureen Hedge, his neighbor, in April 1985, Vicki Wegerle in September 1986, Dolores Davis in January 1991. Each murder followed the same pattern: stalking, cut phone lines, a ligature, a staged scene. But this time, no letters, no phone calls, no taunting. Why? Investigators would later learn that the killer had married, had 2 children, and was working steady jobs. He had become a compliance officer for the city of Park City, a suburb of Wichita. His job was to enforce zoning regulations, to measure how high the grass grew in his neighbors' yards, to photograph stray dogs and write citations. He attended church regularly. He led a Cub Scout troop. He coached. His coworkers thought he was rigid, petty, and obsessive about rules. His wife thought he was distant. His children thought he was a strict, ordinary father. None of them knew that on certain nights, he drove to other neighborhoods, cut telephone wires, and strangled women he had spent weeks watching. For BTK, the silence ended on March 19, 2004. That morning, the Wichita Eagle received a letter from someone claiming to be the long-dormant killer. Enclosed were photocopies of Vicki Wegerle's driver's license and 3 Polaroid photographs of her body taken at the crime scene in 1986. Photos that had never been publicly released. Photos only the killer could possess. The city of Wichita froze. The man who had terrorized them in the 1970s was alive. He was here, he was watching, and he wanted to play again. Over the next 11 months, BTK sent 11 more communications. Packages dropped in parks, cereal boxes left on rural roads, letters mailed to local news stations. He included puzzles, fake identification cards, chapters of an autobiography he was apparently writing, and photocopies of jewelry he had taken from his victims. He even mailed a doll, hands and feet bound, a plastic bag over its head, meant to recreate the murder of 11-year-old Josephine Otero 30 years earlier. Police began responding through coded messages on local television. They asked him questions. He answered. They asked if he would be willing to communicate by floppy disk. He asked in a separate message whether such a communication could be traced. The police, through a coded TV message, told him no. It was a lie. On February 16, 2005, a padded envelope arrived at Fox affiliate KSAS TV in Wichita. Inside was a purple floppy disk. On the disk was a single Word document containing a message from BTK. But beneath that visible message, embedded in the file's metadata, were 2 pieces of information that would end the most notorious unsolved case in Kansas history. The first was the name Dennis. The second was a deleted file path that pointed to Christ Lutheran Church. Detectives ran a search. Christ Lutheran Church in Park City had a council president named Dennis Rader, 60 years old, married, 2 children, Cub Scout leader, compliance officer, a man so deeply embedded in his community that he was, on paper, almost invisible. Investigators pulled his daughter Carrie's DNA from a pap smear sample taken at a university medical clinic, obtained through a search warrant. They compared it to DNA recovered from beneath Vicki Wegerle's fingernails 19 years earlier. It was a familial match. The killer was her father. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Rader was driving home from his city job, still wearing his compliance officer uniform, when police pulled him over near his house. He looked at the officers and reportedly said, quote, "Hello, Mr. Landwehr," end quote, referring to the lead detective on the BTK case, whose face he had watched on television for decades. He did not resist. He did not deny. In interrogation, he confessed for more than 30 hours in clinical, organized detail to 10 murders. He described each victim with disturbing precision. He referred to his crimes as projects. He kept what he called hit kits in his car: rope, tape, plastic bags, knives. He stored trophies, jewelry, driver's licenses, Polaroids in his city hall office and in a hollowed-out floor of his shed. The man who had spent 30 years measuring his neighbors' yards had been hiding his trophies inside the buildings where he worked. In June 2005, Dennis Rader pleaded guilty in open court. What followed was one of the most surreal legal proceedings ever broadcast in the United States. Standing at a podium, in a calm, almost bureaucratic voice, Rader walked the judge through each of his murders in turn. He used the language of a project manager. He spoke of trolling, of selecting, of stalking. He referred to victims by number. When asked why he killed Marine Hedge, his neighbor, he said, quote, "That was a project I had been working on for some time," end quote. He showed no visible emotion. He corrected the judge on minor details. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences, one for each victim, totaling 175 years without parole. Kansas had no death penalty at the time of his earliest murders, which legally protected him from execution. He was sent to El Dorado Correctional Facility, where he remains today. But the questions BTK leaves behind are larger than the verdict. How did a man like Dennis Rader, ordinary in every visible way, sustain a secret life of murder for 3 decades without a single person in his family, his church, or his workplace suspecting anything? Profilers have studied him relentlessly. They describe a man with extreme compartmentalization, with grandiose narcissism, and with a deep, lifelong addiction to control. He needed power over others. He needed an audience. The letters, the taunts, the self-naming were not separate from the murders. They were the murders. Killing alone was not enough. He needed Wichita to know. He needed the press to print his name. He needed detectives to chase his shadow. And in the end, that need is what destroyed him. If he had stayed silent in 2004, he would almost certainly have died a free man. He could not stay silent. The same compulsion that drove him to write rambling poems about his victims in 1978 drove him to mail a floppy disk in 2005. He could not let go of the audience, and the audience finally caught him. There is one more haunting detail. In the years since his arrest, Rader has corresponded with journalists, with authors, with criminologists. He has tried to revise his own story, to soften it, to explain it as the result of childhood fantasies that grew uncontrollable. His daughter Carrie has written a memoir about discovering that the father who taught her to ride a bike was the man who had hunted women in her own town. She describes a kind of grief that has no name, the grief of losing someone who was never truly there. And Wichita, decades later, still carries the weight. The families of the Oteros, the Brights, the Vians, the Foxes, the Hedges, the Wegerls, the Davises, children who became orphans in a single afternoon. Survivors who have spent their entire adult lives trying to understand what was done to the people they loved. BTK wanted to be remembered. In the cruelest possible irony, he is, but not in the way he imagined. Not as a master, not as an artist, not as the figure of dread he tried to brand himself into. He is remembered as a small, vain man who could not stop talking, a man who mailed his own evidence to the people hunting him, a man whose ego in the end was louder than his cunning. And the floppy disk that ended him, that quiet, ordinary square of purple plastic, sits today in an evidence locker in Kansas, a reminder of how the most dangerous secrets often die from the inside out. If this case stayed with you, do one thing before you leave. Subscribe to Dark Cases and turn on the bell, because next week we open a file that has been buried for 40 years, and we need you in the room when we do. Hit like to help this story reach someone who has never heard the name BTK. The dark is wide, we walk it together.